In 1978, Salem still glimmered through the Halloween night, but on the edge of town, the Grayson pumpkin field lay in complete darkness, as if the world had forgotten it. Locals whispered that the soil there was once fed with blood, and if it wasn't fed, the harvest would die. On the night of October 31st, 3 men went out into the field and vanished, leaving only tire tracks that ended among hollowed pumpkins. Since then, every Halloween, the pumpkins keep growing, pulsing faintly through the fog, as though they're breathing, waiting for someone to return and feed the earth once more. October in Salem always carried a strange kind of beauty, the kind that both enchanted and unsettled. The maple leaves burned crimson, old cobblestone streets wound through the town, and dark wooden houses still hung their glowing jack-o'-lanterns from the porches. No one in Salem ever forgot its past, the trials, the fires, the 17 who were burned for witchcraft. The land seemed to breathe still, and every cold gust carried the faint exhale of restless souls. Jacob Grayson stood in the middle of his father's field, staring at the hundreds of full, round pumpkins gleaming under the moonlight. The soil there was black as coal, damp and heavy with the scent of rusted iron. People in Salem liked to say the Grayson farm was blessed, but the older folks whispered otherwise, that the earth was kept alive by something other than water and fertilizer. No one said it aloud. No one dared ask. For generations, the harvest had never failed. The Graysons had lived on the outskirts of Salem for over a century, tilling the same ground Jacob's great-grandfather once plowed. It was said that during the drought years, Elias Grayson, Jacob's father, buried something deep in the soil, and after that, the earth turned fertile again. Elias never denied it. He only said, "The land needs to be fed, same as we do." When he died, Jacob took over the farm, but he never spoke of those stories again. Every Halloween, while the townsfolk celebrated, dressing up, lighting lanterns, parading straw witches through the streets, the Graysons stayed behind. They never joined the festival. That night was for harvesting the last of the pumpkins. Some said it was tradition, others called it an offering. A few daring children who crept close to the old wooden fence claimed they heard murmurs rising from the ground, voices whispering someone's name. This year, Jacob could feel something different. The fog was thicker than usual, draping the field like a heavy blanket. Each step sank deep, as though the soil tried to hold him in place. The pumpkins looked larger, their skins glossy and strangely warm to the touch. When he rested his hand on one, it quivered, or perhaps it was only the wind. From afar came the faint echo of laughter, music from the town's festival. But here, surrounded by silence and the scent of living earth, Jacob knew Halloween was never the same. For the Graysons, it wasn't a night of masks. It was the night the earth opened its mouth. And this year, he was the only one left to feed it. One down. The Grayson field stretched all the way to the edge of the forest, where the bare trees tangled together like the ribs of some long-dead beast. From above, the black soil stood out against the withered golden fields surrounding it, a wound that never healed. The air there was thick and damp, heavy with rot, seeping into the skin, into the clothes, and into the dreams of anyone who lingered too long. People in Salem called it the mouth of the earth. Everything planted there grew fast and full, yet every so often, someone simply vanished. Sheriff Doyle, who had served the town for over 30 years, still remembered the disappearances from the year before. 3 hired men from Boston, strong, hard-working, sober, had started speaking of strange sounds in the night, like a heartbeat echoing deep beneath the ground. When Doyle came to investigate, he found nothing but deep claw marks in the mud and a metallic tang that clung to the air. He had thought of forcing Jacob to abandon the farm, but when he met the man's cold, stone-like stare, Doyle turned away in silence. Martha, Jacob's wife, was different. She rarely left the old wooden house, living among the smell of candles, ashes, and yellowed family photographs. At night, she would hear the ground shifting outside the window, soft murmurs without shape or meaning. Once, she dared to walk out into the field and press her hand to the soil. It was warm, pulsing faintly, like a vein under skin. From that night on, she never stepped outside again. Jacob worked the land the way his father had. Each morning he walked the rows of pumpkins, pressing his hands into the dirt, feeling its moisture, its strange vitality. But sometimes, when he dug deeper, he unearthed things that shouldn't have been there. A scrap of cloth, a button, a tooth. He buried them again without a word. In his mind, his father's warning still echoed. If the land isn't fed, it feeds on the one who tends it. The townsfolk whispered that the Grayson pumpkins were unnatural, their flesh dense and dark red, their seeds black as ash. Some had tried to plant them elsewhere, but none ever sprouted. It was as if only that soil knew how to keep them alive. Each evening, as the fog began to roll in, the field would disappear beneath a heavy veil of mist, as though it were breathing. Martha swore she saw shapes moving between the rows, bent figures gliding low to the ground. Jacob never answered, only kept his head down and worked. But deep inside, he knew the whispers were not lies. Ever since his father's death, the field had never rested. It was hungry, and Halloween was drawing near. October 31st, 1978. Pish. The moon hung low in the sky, thin and red like watered blood. Wind swept across the rows of massive pumpkins, making them sway and whisper against one another, a sound like breath hissing between teeth. Jacob Grayson stood at the edge of the field, holding a kerosene lamp. Its small flame trembled in the fog, casting a wavering light over his stone-like face. It was time for the final harvest, the ritual every Grayson man had carried out on Halloween night. Two hired hands, Pete and Nolan, worked beside him. They weren't from Salem, just drifters from out of town, paid well to haul the heavy carts of pumpkins. Since sunset, they had worked in silence, cutting stems and stacking the ripe fruit. At first, everything seemed ordinary. The thick, metallic scent of the soil, the restless whisper of wind. But as the night deepened, the air grew denser, as though the fog had become a thin layer of skin stretched over everything. Jacob noticed the ground beneath him turning wetter, heavier. Each step sank deep, the mud clinging to his boots as if to hold him back. The pumpkins had swollen to unnatural size, their skins taut, as though something inside them was pressing to get out. A few radiated a faint warmth, a warmth that didn't belong to the cold night. Pete bent down to roll one onto the cart, then froze. His voice cracked, hoarse and strangled. He said the pumpkin had moved. Jacob dismissed it, urging them to keep working. But when his own hand brushed against a nearby pumpkin, he felt it, a faint, steady pulse beneath the rind, rhythmic, human. He recoiled, heart pounding, and scanned the fog. The lamplight reached only a few feet ahead, everything beyond it warped and distant, like sound coming through water. Nolan pushed the cart toward the center of the field, muttering curses. Then the ground trembled under the wheels. A dry snap echoed, as if a bone had cracked deep below. A gust of cold air rose from the earth, carrying the stench of rust and rot. The three men froze. The lamp flickered and went out. In the darkness, Jacob heard it, the wet tearing of soil, followed by a slow, deliberate exhale. He struck a match, but the flame refused to catch. Beneath his feet, the ground shifted, bubbling softly before splitting open in narrow seams. A dark, viscous substance seeped upward, crawling along the pumpkin roots. Nearby pumpkins began to collapse inward, pulsing like lungs, releasing faint, muffled groans. Nolan screamed and ran, but within seconds, his footsteps vanished into the fog. Pete dropped his hoe and stumbled backward, only to be yanked down, dragged away not by hands, but by the earth itself. Jacob tried to run, but the mud held him fast. Then came the voice, deep, drawn out, rising from beneath the ground. "Your turn, Jacob." It was his father's voice, Elias Grayson's. The soil beneath him shuddered, growing hot. When he fell forward, the dirt rushed into his mouth, tasting of blood and iron. Before the darkness took him, he saw something emerge from the field. A figure of soil and vine, shaped like a man, its body wrapped in tangled roots. It had no eyes, but Jacob knew it was looking straight at him. At dawn, when the sun rose over Salem, only half-finished tracks marked the field. No Jacob, no Pete, no Nolan. Only the pumpkins, larger than the night before, their flesh dense and warm, heavy with something still alive inside. Niseta. Dawn rose over Salem beneath a blanket of mist, thick as wet cloth. Sheriff Doyle reached the Grayson field before the sun had cleared the tree line. He'd heard about the three missing men, but what chilled him more was the faint metallic tang that drifted through the wind, a smell that had no place in a pumpkin field. As he stepped over the wooden fence, the ground beneath his boots felt warm, soft, and freshly turned, as if it had been dug through during the night. The cart sat in the middle of the field, tipped to one side. The wheel tracks stopped abruptly, sinking into the mud as though swallowed whole. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no prints. Only the pumpkins, hundreds of them, perfectly round, glistening, lined up in rows as if watching. Doyle crouched, pulled out his knife, and sliced one open. The blade met something thick and resistant, heavy and wet. When the flesh split, he stumbled back in shock. Inside wasn't orange. It was deep crimson, dense and steaming. A heat rose from the core, carrying the iron scent of something alive. Embedded in the pulpy flesh was a slick, pale strand, something that looked disturbingly like a human tendon. The field was utterly still. Doyle backed away and called for reinforcements. But by the time they returned, the pumpkins had deflated. Their skins had collapsed inward, their insides dried to husks within hours, as if whatever had been inside had left. With no evidence, no bodies, and no clear cause, the case was closed as unexplained disappearance. Salem fell silent again, leaving only whispers in taverns that the Grayson land had taken its fill for the year. Martha Grayson did not fall silent. After that night, she barely moved from her window, her eyes sunken, her hands trembling. She said Jacob called her name every night, his voice rising faintly from beneath the field. Once, she wandered outside barefoot through the fog, her nightgown dragging through the mud. By morning, neighbors found her sitting motionless at the field's edge, her dress streaked with soil, clutching a small pumpkin to her chest. She said it was warm. She said it was breathing. They sent her to the state asylum, where she lived 2 more years before dying quietly in her sleep. But the Grayson field did not die with her. Each autumn, without seed or plow, pumpkins continued to grow. Fast, full, impossibly perfect, as though tended by invisible hands. A group of film students once visited, hoping to document haunted soil. They claimed that whenever they placed a microphone near the ground, their recorder picked up a faint, steady rhythm, like a heartbeat. When they cut open one of the pumpkins, they found something hard inside, a small, polished fragment of bone. They ran, abandoning their camera among the vines. The recovered footage showed only the final moments: grass swaying, a sharp inhale, then silence. Years passed, and the field became forbidden ground. Salem's children told ghost stories of the pumpkins that breathe. The adults avoided the subject, though they admitted that on foggy nights, a low murmuring still drifted from that direction, like prayers whispered from beneath the earth. And though no one tended the soil, the pumpkins kept returning every October 31st. Big, round, their flesh dark as blood, and sometimes, if one looked closely enough, something inside them seemed to move. Kari. 40 years had passed since that Halloween night in 1978. Salem had changed. The old houses were freshly painted. Souvenir shops lined the streets year-round, and tourists came to hear tales of witches and hauntings. But on the northern edge of town, where the old cobblestone road led toward the Grayson field, time seemed to have stopped. No one had set foot there in decades. Weeds swallowed the fences, and yet every autumn the pumpkins still grew, thick and heavy, though no one had planted a single seed. One moans B, though no one had planted a single seed. Sam Grayson, grandson of Jacob, returned to Salem in the Halloween season of 2018. He was the last of the Grayson name, raised in California, and knowing almost nothing about the land of his ancestors. When the lawyer sent notice of his inheritance, the old farm, Sam decided to visit once before selling it off. He didn't believe in local legends. To him, they were only the superstitions of a small town clinging to its ghost stories. The wooden house still stood, leaning at the field's edge, its roof half collapsed, but its windows still facing the soil. Inside, dust lay thick as ash. The air reeked of rotten cinders. Sam pushed open the door, the floorboards creaking beneath his feet, each step echoing like a memory from the past. On the table, beneath a thin layer of dust, lay an old photograph. Jacob standing in the middle of the field, enormous pumpkins behind him. Crawled beneath it, in a trembling hand, were the words, "The earth eats every season." By dusk, Sam walked out to the field. The soil was still black and damp, the pumpkins grown in tight clusters, larger than any he had ever seen. Curious, he knelt and cut one open, planning to take a photo to show his friends. But when the knife sliced through, the inside burst open, warm, thick, and red like fresh blood. Among the glistening black seeds, something jutted up, a human hand, shriveled and stiff, its fingernails still intact. Sam staggered back, his heart hammering. From deep within the earth came a low, drawn-out moan, the sound of something waking. The ground began to tremble, dust rising into a dim, choking mist. Sam fell to his knees, his hands sinking into the mud. Through the shrieking wind, a voice whispered, rough and far away, calling his name. "Sam, the earth is still hungry." The next morning, Sheriff Doyle, now old, his hair completely white, drove past the field while the fog still clung to the ground. He stopped, seeing a set of fresh tire tracks ending in the middle of the pumpkins, exactly as it had 40 years before. There was no sign of Sam. Only the massive pumpkins remained, their hollow insides faintly pulsing with each breath of wind, as though alive. As the sheriff turned to leave, one pumpkin near the fence cracked open. From the narrow slit, a faint orange light glowed, and inside, something was trying to open its eyes. The Grayson field had been fed once more. "You know,